Get that rope around him and throw his ass in the ocean." The words, sharp and venomous, cut through the roar of the Pacific surf. On the cold, moonlit sand of Coronado Beach, a group of exhausted men, shivering in their soaked utilities, watched as their instructor's command hung in the air, a death sentence wrapped in the guise of training. This was the Forge, the crucible where boys were broken and Navy SEALs were made, or so they said. For Petty Officer candidate Jake Riley, it felt more like a personalized corner of hell. Coronado, the name alone, sent a shiver of both reverence and dread down the spine of every aspiring warrior. A sun-drenched paradise on the outside, but for the men of Buddy S. Class 134, it was an unforgiving island of pain, governed by a brutal king. Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne. Riley had grown up on stories of men like Thorne. His own father, a SEAL legend lost in the mountains of Afghanistan, was a titan from that same mold. Jake would trace the golden trident on his father's dress uniform, the eagle's fierce gaze a promise of valor. He watched documentaries about the teams, saw the quiet professionalism, the unbreakable brotherhood in their eyes, and saw not just a career, but a calling. He wanted to be a SEAL. He had to be. He finally earned his spot in Buddy S., his heart pounding with the same ferocious pride he felt as a boy. But the reality of Coronado was colder than the midnight surf. "Riley, is that how you stow your gear? You trying to get your whole boat crew killed?" Master Chief Thorne's voice was a gravelly rasp that could strip paint. He jabbed a hardened finger at a single grain of sand on Riley's rifle. The microscopic speck, invisible to any normal eye, was all the justification Thorne needed to unleash a tirade that echoed across the training compound. "I'm sorry, Master Chief," Riley bellowed, his body snapping to attention, his eyes locked forward. Cold sweat traced a path down his spine. Thorne was a legend in the teams, a master of unconventional warfare, a man who could navigate by the stars and survive for weeks on nothing but grit. His skills were undeniable, but his leadership was a razor blade, constantly testing for weakness, aimed at those he deemed unworthy. And for some reason, from day one, that blade was pointed directly at Jake Riley. "Sorry doesn't bring back dead men, Riley. Your weakness, your lack of attention to detail, is a cancer in my team. You think because of your last name you get a pass here. You think your father's ghost is gonna carry you across the finish line." Standing just behind Thorne, a perpetual shadow, was Petty Officer First Class Diaz. He was Thorne's enforcer, his echo. Though years Riley's senior, Diaz seemed to draw his own authority from Thorne's cruelty, and he relished every opportunity to join in. "Master Chief's right, Riley. Daddy isn't here to save you. This ain't some legacy program. This is the teams. You earn your place, or you wash out. Maybe you're just not cut out for it." The name Riley, it was Jake's greatest pride and his heaviest anchor. Lieutenant Commander Bullfrog Riley, a SEAL SEAL. His legacy was a ghost that haunted Jake's every step, a standard he felt impossible to meet. Jake never wanted special treatment. He downplayed his lineage, wanting to earn the trident on his own merit. But in the tight-knit community of naval special warfare, secrets were impossible. The story of the fallen hero's son trying to follow in his footsteps spread like wildfire. And for Thorne, it made Jake a target. The instructors pushed him harder. The other candidates kept a wary distance, unsure if he was a golden boy or a marked man. The training was a relentless beast. Log PT, carrying a 200-pound telephone pole until muscles screamed and bones ached. Drown proofing, where they tied your hands and feet and threw you in a pool. Miles of soft sand runs in wet boots. And surf torture, where they'd make you lie in the frigid Pacific until your body went numb and your teeth chattered uncontrollably. Jake endured it all. He pushed through the pain, his muscles tearing, his body covered in a permanent layer of grit and bruises. He embraced the suck. He did it for his father. He did it for the trident. He refused to quit. But it wasn't the physical torment that was breaking him. It was the psychological warfare, the constant, targeted harassment. Thorne and Diaz would lose his gear before an inspection, forcing him to take the punishment for the entire boat crew. They'd assign him extra watch duties, leaving him sleep-deprived and exhausted before the most demanding evolutions. They engineered his failures, then crucified him for them in front of his peers, eroding the trust that was supposed to be the bedrock of the teams. They seemed to savor the moments when his body was failing, when his spirit was on the verge of shattering. And then came that night, the night of the special evolution. It wasn't on any training schedule. Riley, your not tying is piss poor. You're a liability. Tonight, we fix it. Thorne's voice was low, almost conspiratorial, after the final formation. He held up a length of thick, nylon rope. Jake had meticulously inspected his gear before every drill. He knew his knots were perfect, but as Thorne ran the rope through his hands, a section in the middle looked frayed, deliberately worn. As if someone had scraped it against coral, it was impossible. Unless it was done on purpose. Jake bit his lip, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. He wanted to scream, to protest, to call out the lie. But he knew it was pointless. It would only bring a worse storm of fury. Yes, Master Chief, I'll get a new line from the quartermaster. Forget it, Thorne sneered. You won't be tying any knots tonight. You're gonna be the knot. You're gonna learn what it feels like to have your life depend on a single line. Dios, you're with me. Riley, you just follow our lead. Don't fall behind. A cold dread, colder than any ocean plunge, settled in Jake's gut. The moon was a sliver in the sky, hidden behind a thick blanket of coastal fog. The only sounds were their boots on the wet sand and the endless, crashing roar of the waves. Thorne wasn't leading them to the training pool. He was leading them to the open ocean, far down the beach, away from the prying eyes of the base. The salt spray felt like needles on his face. In Thorne's hand, the rope looked less like a tool of rescue and more like a leash. Tonight, the beautiful, star-dusted sky above Coronado felt menacing and deadly. The darkness was absolute. It swallowed the land, the sea, the sky. The only light was the faint, ghostly glow of the foam as waves crashed on the shore. They were miles from the Bade-esque compound, in a desolate stretch of coastline known for its treacherous currents. The objective, Thorne had said, was a confidence-building exercise, a midnight swim to a channel marker buoy a half-mile offshore and back. But this felt different. This wasn't training. It was a ritual. All right, Riley, on your knees. Thorne's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He knelt in the wet sand, the cold seeping through his fatigues. You're gonna learn about trust tonight, kid. You're gonna learn what it feels like to have absolutely no control. To put your life, 100%, in your teammates' hands. Before Jake could process the words, Dios was behind him, yanking his arms back with brutal efficiency. He began to bind Jake's wrists with a zip tie, pulling it so tight it bit into his flesh. Then, his ankles. Master Chief, this isn't a standard evolution, Jake said, his voice strained, trying to keep the panic from rising. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. There's nothing standard about the men we're hunting, Riley, or the situations you'll find yourself in. You get captured, you think the enemy's gonna play by the rules. I'm preparing you for the real world. He attached the frayed rope to a loop on Jake's gear. The other end, he held in his hand. Get him in the water. Dios hauled Jake to his feet and shoved him toward the surf. The Pacific in November is a merciless beast. The shock of the water, a brutal 48 degrees, stole Jake's breath. His body convulsed, every muscle screaming in protest. Swim, Riley, use your body, dolphin kick. You wanna live, you swim, Thorne yelled from the beach. With his hands and feet bound, swimming was a desperate, exhausting struggle. Jake contorted his body, kicking with all his might, trying to keep his head above the surface. He could feel the gentle tug of the rope, his only connection to the world. For a moment, a sliver of hope returned. This was just another test. A brutal, insane test, but a test nonetheless. He kicked and writhed, making slow, agonizing progress toward the distant, blinking light of the buoy. The cold was a living thing, draining his strength, slowing his thoughts. He could hear Thorne and Dios following him in a small inflatable raft, their dark shapes just visible against the murky horizon. He finally reached the buoy, his lungs burning, his body trembling on the verge of hypothermia. He clung to the cold, rusted metal, gasping for air. Not done yet, Riley, Thorne's voice echoed across the water. The exercise is over when I say it's over. Now get off my buoy and head back to shore. Jake let go. His limbs feeling like lead, he started the grueling journey back, his movements becoming sluggish, his kicks weaker. He was running on fumes, his core temperature plummeting. He was about 100 yards from shore when the tension on the rope suddenly went slack. He stopped, treading water frantically. "Master Chief!" "Silence!" He twisted his body, trying to see the raft. It was gone. The dark shape had vanished. He was alone. In the middle of the ocean, bound, with a frayed rope trailing behind him into the blackness. "Master Chief Thorne!" He screamed, his voice swallowed by the waves. "Dios!" Only the roar of the surf answered him. A wave crashed over his head, forcing saltwater down his throat. He came up sputtering, panic clawing its way up his chest. This wasn't a test anymore. They had left him. They had caught the rope, and they had left him to die. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Jake Riley's world was nothing but cold, darkness, and the crushing weight of the water. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the burn in his lungs, the frantic, useless struggle of his bound limbs, and the chilling finality of abandonment. Is this it? Is this how it ends? The face of his father, smiling in his dress whites, flashed in his mind. The pride he'd felt telling his family he was going to Buddy S., the dream of the Trident. All of it was dissolving into the black, icy water. Thump! A dull impact against his side. He thought it was a piece of driftwood, then another. He managed to twist his head just enough to see it. The frayed end of the rope, it hadn't been cut. It had been dropped, it was just floating there. A useless, mocking reminder of the trust he had so foolishly placed in his leader. Rage, pure and hot, surged through him, a furnace against the encroaching hypothermia. It was a primal fire that burned away the fear and despair. No, not like this. He wasn't going to die here. He wasn't going to be a footnote in Thorne's twisted training manual. He wasn't going to let his father's name be dishonored by a son who gave up. He stopped struggling against the water and forced himself to think. Drown-proofing, the instructors said it. Panic is the killer. Conserve energy, control your breathing. He took a gulp of air, then let his body sink below the surface, into the crushing quiet. Down here, the chaotic waves were just a distant rumble. He used the dolphin kick, the one they had drilled into them for hundreds of hours, to propel himself upwards. Break the surface, gasp for air, sink, kick, repeat. It was a rhythm of survival. He didn't aim for the shore where he'd last seen them. He aimed further down the coast, using the current. If Thorne was watching, he'd expect him to fight his way back to the starting point. Jake had to be smarter. Time blurred. Each breath was a victory. Each kick was an act of defiance. He wasn't just swimming. He was fighting. He was fighting Thorne. He was fighting Dios. He was fighting the ghost of his own father, proving he was worthy not just of the name, but of the will to live that came with it. He didn't know how long it had been. An hour, 2. His movements were robotic, his mind a hazy fog. He could feel his body shutting down. The shivering had stopped, a dangerous sign. A strange warmth was spreading through his limbs. Then, his feet hit something. Not sand, rock. He drifted into a small cove, a jagged collection of rocks that broke the incoming waves. With the last ounce of his strength, he kicked and squirmed his way past the surf line, collapsing onto the wet, stony shore. He lay there, a broken heap, the waves washing over his legs. He was alive. He had survived. Suddenly, a beam of light sliced through the darkness, hitting his face. "My God," a voice said, filled not with malice, but with shock. "What in God's name happened to you?" Jake tried to lift his head. The light was blinding. He could make out the silhouette of a man in a jogging suit. The man rushed to his side, pulling out a pocket knife and quickly slicing through the zip ties on his wrists and ankles. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Evans, the base medical officer. Can you tell me your name, son?" Jake's teeth chattered to hard-to-form words. His skin was pale blue in the beam of the flashlight. Evans didn't wait for an answer. He saw the Buddy S insignia on his tattered uniform. He took off his own jacket, wrapping it around Jake's shoulders. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He wasn't calling the Buddy S command center. He was dialing a number that would bypass the entire local chain of command. "This is Lieutenant Commander Evans at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. I need to report a critical incident involving a trainee. No, not a training accident. This looks like an assault. Get me a line to NCIS, now." Back at the Buddy S barracks, Master Chief Thorne and Petty Officer Dios were cleaning their gear. They had picked up the discarded rope from the surf a mile down the beach. As far as anyone knew, they were never there. If Riley's body washed up in the morning, it would be a tragic mystery. A promising candidate who went for a late-night swim and never came back. A testament to the unforgiving nature of the sea. But as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, a sound rarely heard within the confines of the base, Thorne felt the first, unfamiliar prickle of unease. He had created a storm to test one man's breaking point. He had no idea he had just unleashed a hurricane that was about to tear his world apart. The arrival of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, on the hallowed grounds of the Bud A.'s training compound was like a foreign plague. These were not warriors, they were investigators, their clean shoes and sharp suits a stark contrast to the grit and grime of Coronado. They moved with a quiet, methodical authority that unnerved the instructors and trainees alike. Leading the investigation was Special Agent Isabella Rossi. She had a reputation for being relentless, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see through bluster and bravado. She understood the SEAL community's insular nature, their code of silence. She knew this would be like trying to crack a granite wall with a teaspoon. Her interviews with the members of Class 234 yielded nothing. Did you notice anything unusual about Master Chief Thorne's training methods? No, ma'am. He's tough. He's supposed to be. He's training us to be SEALs. Were you aware of an unsanctioned training evolution on the night in question? Negative, Agent Rossi. We were secured in our barracks after evening formation. Does the name Jake Riley mean anything to you? A flicker of something? Fear, pity. But the answer was always the same. He's one of us, ma'am, a brother. They were closing ranks. It was the warrior's creed. You don't rat on your own, especially not to outsiders. To speak against a Master Chief, a living legend like Thorne, was career suicide. It was a betrayal of the brotherhood. The fear of Thorne was greater than their sense of duty to the truth. Next was Petty Officer Diaz. He sat across from Rossi, a smug confidence radiating from him. He was a loyal soldier, defending his king. Jake Riley is, or was a good kid, but he was struggling. A lot of pressure, with his father's legacy, and all. He just didn't have that extra gear you need for this line of work. Master Chief Thorne was trying to help him find it. Pushing him, sure, but only for his own good. So you're saying leaving a man bound and alone in the open ocean is helpful? Rossi's voice was dangerously soft. Diaz's smirk didn't waver. I don't know anything about that. Sounds like a wild story. Maybe the kid was cracking under the pressure, hallucinating. It happens. He was gaslighting, spinning a narrative of a weak candidate failing to hack the program. Finally, Master Chief Thorne himself, he walked into the interview room with the calm assurance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He sat down, his massive hands resting on the table, his gaze steady and unwavering. Let's cut to the chase, Agent Rossi, he began, before she could even ask a question. I've dedicated 25 years of my life to this country and to this program. I forge weapons. I take boys and I turn them into the most elite warriors the world has ever known. My methods are not for the faint of heart. They are not meant to be comfortable. They are meant to save lives in the hellholes of the world. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. Jake Riley is the son of a hero, but the blood of a lion doesn't guarantee the heart of one. I saw a weakness in him, a hesitation that would get his teammates killed. I pushed him. I will not apologize for that. If he couldn't handle the pressure here, in a controlled environment, then he has no business wearing the trident. My only crime is trying to uphold the standards that make us who we are. He was brilliant. He was twisting the narrative, framing a criminal act of assault as a necessary, if harsh, training technique. He was painting Jake as a failure and himself as the uncompromising guardian of the SEAL ethos. The investigation was hitting a wall. Without a confession or a witness, it was a decorated Master Chief's word against a trainee who was now being painted as mentally unstable. The whispers around the base were already starting. Riley couldn't hack it. He's trying to blame a Master Chief for his own failure. He's dishonoring his father's name. Agent Rossi was frustrated. She reviewed Jake's medical file, the notes from Lieutenant Commander Evans describing severe hypothermia, rope burns, and signs of prolonged immersion. The physical evidence was there, but the story was missing. She decided to change tactics. If she couldn't break the wall in front of her, she would dig underneath it. She requested Thorne's complete service record, every fitness report, every mission debrief, and most importantly, the records of every Buddy's class he had ever instructed. For days, she and her team sifted through mountains of digital and paper files. It was a tedious, soul-crushing process. Then, she found it, a pattern. Over the last 5 years, under Thorne's instruction, there was an unusually high number of candidates who had washed out due to training-related injuries, not the usual stress fractures or torn ligaments, but things that seemed odd. A dislocated shoulder from a fall in the barracks. A concussion from slipping on the pool deck. A severe case of pneumonia after a routine swim. Each incident, on its own, was plausible. But together, they painted a dark picture, and one name stood out. Seaman apprentice Marcus Cole, dropped from the program 2 years prior. The official report cited failure to adapt and a loss of nerve during a dive qualification exercise. But Rossi dug deeper and found a preliminary medical report that had been superseded. It mentioned signs of oxygen deprivation, inconsistent with a standard equipment malfunction. Rossi knew she had to find Marcus Cole. He was the key. Her team tracked him down to a quiet town in Oregon, where he was working as a mechanic. He had left the Navy and never looked back. When Rossi finally sat down with him in a small-town diner, Cole was hesitant, his eyes haunted by a memory he had tried to bury. "Master Chief Thorne," Cole said, his voice barely a whisper. "He had it out for me, said I didn't have the killer instinct." He told Rossi about his final dive. It was supposed to be a simple gear retrieval exercise in the training tank. Thorne was his dive partner. Deep under the water, in the murky tank, Thorne had signaled that he was having trouble with his own regulator. When Cole swam over to assist, Thorne had grabbed Cole's regulator from his mouth and held him, watching the younger man's eyes widen in panic as his lungs began to burn. It lasted only 10, maybe 15 seconds, before Thorne shoved the regulator back in his mouth. But in that terrifying, airless eternity, Thorne had broken him. Cole had surfaced, panicking, and ripping off his gear. He had failed the evolution. He was dropped from the program that day. "I tried to tell my platoon commander," Cole said, staring into his coffee cup. "He said it was my word against a Master Chief's. He said Thorne was probably just testing my reaction under pressure. He advised me to just let it go." Rossi finally had it, a pattern of behavior, a prior victim. Thorne wasn't a trainer. He was a predator, weeding out anyone who didn't fit his twisted image of a warrior, using the brutal nature of Buddy's as a cover for his assaults. She now had the ammunition she needed. The wall of silence was about to come crashing down. While Agent Rossi's investigation methodically chipped away at the fortress Thorne had built around himself, Jake Riley was living in a purgatory. He had been removed from his class and placed on medical hold, confined to a small room in the base's transient barracks. He was physically recovering, but his spirit was in tatters. The brotherhood he had revered his entire life now saw him as a traitor. The other candidates, men he had bled and shivered with, now averted their eyes when he passed. He was an outcast, the man who broke the code, who brought outsiders into their sacred world. He was alone, adrift in a sea of silent condemnation. The only person who spoke to him was Lieutenant Commander Evans. The doctor would stop by in the evenings, bringing a cup of coffee and a willingness to listen. "Are you afraid of what they think of you?" Evans asked one evening as they watched the sunset over the Pacific from the barracks window. "I'm not afraid," Jake said, his voice flat. "I'm just confused. I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" "Why he did it. Why no one will say anything." They all saw it. They saw how he treated me, how he treated others. They just let it happen. I thought this place was about watching each other's backs. About trust. Jake's voice cracked with a bitterness he couldn't hide. The way Thorne looked at me that night, it wasn't just a tough instructor. It was something else, something darker. It was like he hated me for not being broken yet. Evans nodded slowly, his expression grim. He had seen this before, in different forms. Good men twisted by war, by loss, by a rigid ideology that left no room for humanity. Thorne wasn't always like this, Evans said, his voice low. He was one of the best, a true operator, but something changed him. Something broke inside him a long time ago. Agent Rossi was discovering that same truth in a dusty file room in Virginia. She was reading the after-action report from a mission in the Korangal Valley, Afghanistan, 10 years prior. Operation Viper's Nest, Thorne, then a chief petty officer, was leading a small fire team. The report detailed a fierce firefight, a heroic stand against overwhelming odds. But it also detailed a casualty, Petty Officer Second Class Miller, the team's newest member. According to Thorne's report, Miller had hesitated for a split second before laying down suppressing fire. A moment of indecision that allowed an enemy fighter to get a clear shot at another team member, who was critically wounded. Thorne had managed to neutralize the threat and save the wounded man, but Miller was killed in the exchange. Thorne's official statement was a cold, damning indictment. Miller's lack of aggression and hesitation under fire had compromised the mission and cost a life. Thorne had received a medal for his heroism that day. But he had also carried something else back from that mountain, a poisonous conviction. He believed that softness, that even a moment of human hesitation, was a fatal flaw. He became obsessed with eradicating it, both in himself and in the men he trained. He saw it as his sacred duty to break men down to their absolute core, to burn away every trace of doubt or fear, no matter the cost. Anyone who couldn't withstand his fire was, in his mind, another Miller waiting to happen. Another liability who would get good men killed. Jake Riley, with his famous name and the immense pressure that came with it, was Thorne's ultimate test case. He wasn't just training a candidate, he was trying to exorcise the ghost of a decade-old failure. Armed with this new understanding and the damning testimony from Marcus Cole, Agent Rossi summoned Master Chief Thorne again. This was no longer an interview, it was an interrogation. The room felt smaller this time, the air thick with tension. Rossi didn't bother with pleasantries. "Master Chief, what does the word brotherhood mean to you?" "It means everything," Thorne answered, his voice a low rumble. "It means you put the man next to you before yourself, always. And does that brotherhood extend to protecting your teammates from threats even when that threat is one of your own?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. "The only threat to my men is the enemy and their own weakness." Rossi slid a folder across the table. It was Marcus Cole's file, with his signed, sworn statement on top. "Do you remember Seaman Apprentice Marcus Cole?" Thorne glanced at the name. For the first time, a crack appeared in his iron composure. A flicker of something surprise, anger flashed in his eyes before he suppressed it. The perfect poker face he had maintained for weeks was finally starting to crumble. He had built a fortress around his actions, using the bricks of honor, duty, and the SEAL ethos. But Rossi had just found a hidden, rotten foundation. The dark, twisted secret of his past, the ghost of a dead petty officer on a forgotten mountain, was about to bring the whole structure crashing down. The file containing Marcus Cole's statement lay on the table between them, a silent accusation. Master Chief Thorne stared at it, his jaw muscles working, the tendons in his neck standing out like steel cables. The carefully constructed persona of the unwavering warrior was fracturing, revealing the raw, volatile anger beneath. "What is this?" he growled, his voice a low threat. "You dig up some washed-out kid who couldn't handle the pressure, and you think that proves something." "It proves a pattern," Rossi said, her voice calm and even. She pushed a second file across the table. It was the NCIS lab report on the rope recovered by Lieutenant Commander Evans. This rope was found with Petty Officer Candidate Riley. Our forensics team found that the fraying wasn't from normal wear and tear. It was deliberately abraded with a sharp, serrated edge. Like a combat knife, it was designed to fail under stress. It was designed to make him think he was completely alone. She leaned in, her eyes locking onto his. "You didn't just assault him, Master Chief. You psychologically tortured him, just like you did with Cole. Just like you've done with who knows how many others. You aren't forging warriors, you're breaking them. And you're using this uniform as your shield." Thorne said nothing. His breathing was heavy, each exhale a burst of controlled fury. The fortress was collapsing, and he was trapped in the ruins. "Tell me why," Rossi pressed. "Why Riley? Was it his father's name? Did you resent him?" Suddenly, Thorne's control snapped. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. It wasn't the sound of confession, it was the roar of a caged animal. "You have no idea what it takes," he bellowed, his face contorted with a decade of suppressed rage. "You sit in your safe little office, and you judge me. I have held my brothers in my arms as they bled out in the dirt because some kid who wasn't ready hesitated because he had a moment of fear. I am trying to save lives. I am weeding out the weakness that gets men killed. Riley, he had that same hesitation in his eyes. The legacy, the name it was a weight, not a weapon. He was going to be a liability. I was doing him a favor. I was doing the teams a favor. I was forging him into something that could survive, or I was breaking him before he could get others killed. That is my job. That is my duty. His tirade was a torrent of twisted justification, the desperate cry of a man who had convinced himself that his cruelty was a form of nobility. He genuinely believed his crimes were a necessary evil. At that exact moment, the interrogation room door opened. Agent Rossi's partner escorted another man into the room. It was another candidate from Class 134, a quiet, unassuming kid named Martinez. His face was pale, his hands were trembling, but his eyes were filled with a newfound resolve. He had heard Thorne's confession through the one-way glass. He looked not at Rossi, but directly at the Master Chief who had terrorized him for months. "He did it to me, too, Master Chief," Martinez said, his voice shaking but clear. "During the pool competency test, you held my head under the water just a few seconds too long. You said you were testing my water confidence, but I saw your eyes. You enjoyed it." Diaz, who was being held in an adjacent room, had been maintaining his story, denying everything. But when he was told that Martinez had corroborated Riley's story, and that Thorne himself had confessed his motives, he folded completely. It was all him, Diaz blubbered, his bravado evaporating into pathetic tears. "The Master Chief, he planned the whole thing. The rope tying Riley up, he told me to leave the raft. I was just following orders. I was scared of him. Everybody is." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The word of a loyal sycophant, turning on his master to save himself. It was the ultimate betrayal, and for Thorne, the final nail in his coffin. He just stared at the wall, a hollowed-out ruin of a man. The brotherhood he claimed to be protecting had finally, and justly, turned against him. That afternoon, the entire Buddy S training command was assembled on the grinder, the sacred blacktop where so many SEALs had begun their journey. In front of them all, Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne and Petty Officer First Class Diaz stood at attention. They were flanked by two armed master-at-arms. The base commander read the charges: assault, dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming. As cold, steel handcuffs were snapped onto Thorne's wrists, a collective gasp went through the formation. The living legend, the untouchable warrior, was being led away like a common criminal. The invisible law of fear and silence that had governed the compound for years was shattered in that single, decisive moment. The hurricane had made landfall. As the NCIS investigation concluded and the gears of military justice began to turn, Lieutenant Commander Evans found Agent Rossi packing up her files. "You did a good thing here, Agent," he said quietly. "I just followed the evidence," Rossi replied, though they both knew it was more than that. Evans hesitated for a moment before speaking. "This isn't just about Thorne, you know. He was the symptom, not the disease. For years, the command has looked the other way. They saw his toughness as an asset. They saw the high attrition rate in his classes as a sign of high standards, not abuse. They enabled him. They created the monster they're now locking away." His words were a sobering reminder. This wasn't the clean-cut end of a movie. The problem ran deeper. It was a cultural issue, a system that had, for too long, mistaken brutality for strength. Jake Riley's ordeal hadn't just exposed a single criminal. It had exposed a flaw in the very soul of the institution he so desperately wanted to join. The frayed rope was now a tangled web, ensnaring the entire chain of command. The court-martial was a swift and brutal affair. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Cole's testimony, Diaz's confession, and the forensic report on the rope painted an undeniable picture of calculated abuse. In the end, Petty Officer Diaz took a plea deal, tearfully reading a statement of remorse in exchange for a lighter sentence. Master Chief Thorne, however, remained defiant to the last. Given the chance for a final statement, he stood tall, his voice ringing with the same unyielding conviction he'd shown his entire career. "I regret nothing," he said, his eyes scanning the military jury. "My methods were hard because the battlefield is harder. I did what I did to uphold the standards of the United States Navy SEALs and to ensure that only the strongest survive to fight for this country. If that is a crime, then I am guilty. I loved the teams, that is all." It was a chilling final statement, self-serving epitaph of a man blinded by his own zealotry. The verdict was severe. Thorne was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 20 years in the military prison at Leavenworth, and stripped of his rank and honor. The Navy was making a statement. The line between hard training and criminal abuse had been crossed, and it would not be tolerated. The fallout was immediate. The commanding officer of the Budded S program was relieved of duty for failure of leadership. A top-to-bottom review of all training procedures was ordered by Naval Special Warfare Command. Thorne's conviction sent a shockwave through the teams, forcing a painful re-examination of its long-held traditions and the very definition of strength. A few days after the verdict, Jake Riley was summoned to an office overlooking the bay. His father's old boss, now a rear admiral and the head of the entire SEAL Command, was waiting for him. "You've been through hell, son," the admiral said, his voice filled with a gruff sympathy. "What you did took a different kind of courage. It would have been easier to quit, to walk away. No one would have blamed you." He paused, looking out at the ocean. "If you want it, I can make a call. Get you transferred to any unit in the Navy, a quieter life. You've earned it." It was a tempting offer, a chance to escape the whispers, the stares, the ghost of what had happened here. But Jake shook his head. "No, sir, thank you, sir, but I need to stay." The admiral raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This place holds nothing but bad memories for you." "This place also holds my father's legacy, sir," Jake said, his voice steady. "And it's where I learned what true strength is. It's not about being unbreakable. It's about not letting the wrong things break you." Thorne was wrong about what makes a good SEAL. He thought fear made men strong. But it doesn't. Trust does. I want to finish what I started. I want to earn my trident, and I want to be the kind of leader who builds men up, not tears them down. In that moment, the admiral saw not the son of a legend, but a leader in his own right. He saw a man who had been dragged into the deepest, darkest water and had emerged not broken, but forged. He had faced a darkness greater than any enemy on the battlefield. A corruption from within and had chosen to fight it. The admiral stood and offered his hand. "All right, petty officer. Get back to your class, go earn that pin." The admiral's nod was not just permission. It was a vote of confidence. The path ahead was clear. The trial was over, but the true test had just begun. A year passed, the seasons changed over Coronado, but the relentless rhythm of training did not. The waves still crashed, the logs still felt heavy, and the sand was still cold. But something fundamental had shifted in the air. The culture of fear had been replaced by a renewed emphasis on integrity and teamwork. Jake Riley, now Petty Officer Second Class Riley, was no longer a candidate. Pinned to his chest was the golden trident he had dreamed of his entire life. He had not only survived Buddy S, he had excelled, his quiet determination earning him the respect of his peers and his new instructors. The ordeal with Thorne had not broken him, it had tempered him, leaving him with a maturity and perspective far beyond his years. He was assigned to a new role before joining his first team, a junior instructor for the newest class of Buddy S candidates. His first day, he led them to the beach, to the very stretch of sand where his nightmare had begun. The young, nervous faces of the candidates looked at him, waiting for the trial by fire to commence. They all knew his story. It was now a legend at Buddy S, a cautionary tale and a lesson in moral courage. "Are you scared?" Jake asked, his voice calm and steady against the roar of the surf. No one answered. "You should be," he continued. "This ocean is unforgiving. This job is the most dangerous job in the world. A moment of hesitation, a lapse in judgment, and people die, your brothers die. But the thing you should fear most is not the enemy. It's not the cold, it's failing the man next to you." He picked up a length of rope. Master Chief Thorne believed that fear was the ultimate motivator. He believed that by pushing men to their absolute limit, by breaking them, he could make them stronger. He was wrong. Fear creates cracks, it breeds mistrust. And mistrust will get you killed faster than any bullet. His training methods were grueling, demanding, and pushed every man to his physical and mental edge, but they were never cruel. He taught them that communication under duress was more important than silent suffering. He taught them that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. He taught them that the bond between them, the invisible rope of trust, was their single most important piece of gear. One stormy afternoon, during an open water navigation exercise, a freak squall hit the trainees. The sea turned violent, and a young candidate, disoriented by the churning waves, began to panic. He swallowed water and started to sink. "I've got him," another candidate yelled, fighting his way through the swell. "Team, form a chain," Jake commanded from the safety boat. "Talk to him, keep him focused." They worked together, a seamless unit, pulling their flailing teammate from the water. They saved him not through brute force, but through teamwork and trust. As they sat exhausted on the beach later, the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived, Jake held up the dripping rescue line. "This rope is strong," he said to the group, "but it's just nylon. The ropes that connect us trust, the respect, the knowledge that no matter how bad it gets, you are not alone. That is what makes us unbreakable. Today, you didn't just save a man. You proved what it means to be a team." In that moment, they understood. True strength wasn't about enduring abuse. It was about overcoming adversity together. On the same beach where a twisted ideology had nearly cost a man his life, a new generation of warriors was learning a better way. 2 years later, the Rear Admiral made an unannounced visit to a forward operating base in a dust-choked corner of the world. He watched from the command tent as a SEAL team prepared for a nighttime raid. The team's junior element leader moved with a quiet, confident authority, checking his men's gear, offering a steadying word, his eyes missing nothing. It was Jake Riley. Later, the two men stood on a rooftop, watching the twin moons of a foreign sky. "You look comfortable here," the Admiral said. "This is my home, sir," Jake replied with a small smile. The shadows of Coronado were gone from his eyes, replaced by the clear, steady gaze of a combat-hardened leader. "I heard you visited Leavenworth a while back," the Admiral said, his tone questioning. Jake nodded. "Yes, sir, I went to see Thorne." The Admiral looked surprised. "He's still the same," Jake continued, his voice devoid of anger. "He still believes he was right. I didn't go there for an apology. I realized he was just another kind of victim. A victim of his own war, his own fears. Forgiving him isn't the point. But I'm not carrying his weight anymore. I let it go." He was no longer the victim of the story. He was its victor, a man who had not only survived his trauma, but had understood it, processed it, and moved beyond it. "Your father would be proud, Jake," the Admiral said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for the trident, but for the man you become. You're a better leader than he was. You're a better leader than I am." It was the highest praise a man like him could give. They stood in silence, to generations of warriors, watching the horizon. The place that was once a symbol of betrayal and despair had become the foundation for a new kind of strength, a new hope for the future of the teams. Long after the Admiral had gone, Jake remained on the rooftop, the cool desert air on his face. He thought about that night in the ocean, about the feeling of the rope going slack. He remembered the cold, the darkness, the terror. He had been thrown into the abyss, tied by a rope of lies and deceit. But the thing that had pulled him out, the thing that kept him going every single day, was a different kind of line. An unbreakable cord woven from his father's memory, the trust of his new brothers, and his own hard-won belief in himself. The darkness had tried to claim him, but instead, it had shown him the light. The sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the harsh landscape. It was a new day. And Jake Riley was ready for it. The journey we've shared today is about more than just surviving. It's about the true meaning of strength. It's not found in being the loudest voice or the harshest hand. It's found in the courage to speak truth to power, the resilience to heal from our deepest wounds, and the wisdom to lead with trust, not terror. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that true brotherhood is about lifting each other up, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you found strength not in being unbreakable, but in refusing to be broken. Thank you for watching.